Good morning. How are you doing today? I'm really frustrated, Doc. I've tried so hard to lose weight. I've done all the usual diets. I try really hard to get all the protein I need, and I go to my trainer regularly. So when you say you've done all the usual diets, can you tell me what diet specifically you're referring to? Well, you know, the usual. I tried quick weight loss a few times. I've done keto a bunch of times. I tried Atkins. I can lose some weight, but then I just keep putting it back on. Okay, well, take me through a typical day of eating. For breakfast, I do eggs or egg whites, or just yogurt sometimes, and I often add a protein shake. Lunch, well, I'll add another protein shake if I'm busy, or if I've got a bit more time, I'll have a Subway cold cut sandwich. Dinner is always chicken or fish with some vegetables. I try really hard to avoid junk food. Sometimes I get sweet cravings and have some chocolate. I know I'm getting too many carbs, but I really struggle to avoid them. Can you elaborate on getting too many carbs? I know, I sound like a psychologist. Well, from time to time I'll have some candy or crackers or chocolate or chips. Sometimes I can't resist a donut, and I love pizza. But I try to limit it to once a day at most. Do you eat fruit? Well, some, but like I said, I try to limit my carbs. What if I told you that carbs are not your problem? Your diet is actually low in carbs. What if I told you that you're actually getting far too much protein? Well, that would be the opposite of everything I've ever read. All I ever hear is eat more protein. And how is that working for you? Well, I know this isn't working, but I think it's because I get too many carbs. I even had pizza the other night. Looking here at your diet log, it looks like you're actually getting a low percentage of your calories from carbs, only about 40%. About 20 to 30% of your calories are coming from protein and 30 to 40% from fats. You're making a mistake when you think of foods like donuts and pizza as carbs. They actually have more calories from fat than they do from carbs. Meanwhile, you're getting very little fiber. Your diet is actually similar to most Americans. Well, my family doctor told me I need more protein. And how much nutrition training has your doctor received? It's not just him. That's all I ever read about on the internet and hear about on TV. And how is all this diet information you refer to working for us? In the US, people eat more protein than any other country except Iceland, and suffer some of the highest rates of overweight, cancer, diabetes, and heart disease, and some of the shortest longevity. The recommended daily amount for protein is about 45 to 55 grams a day, but it looks here like you're doubling that at least. As you can see, my waiting room outside is full, and every one of those people has been on some kind of high protein diet. But isn't it our sugar consumption? I thought the low-fat diets failed. Well, we never actually ate low-fat. We just added more sugar. Instead of going on a low-fat, high-processed carb diet, we really should have gone on a high fruit and veggie, high-starch, low-protein diet. Come on, you've got to be kidding me. A high-starch diet? Look, if we're among the unhealthiest people in the world, shouldn't we look at what the healthiest people do? Cultures like the blue zones of Okinawa and Sardinia are much healthier than we are, but they tend to eat very low protein and very high carb. And it's not in their genes. If they shift to a Western diet, they become as overweight and sick as we are.
Huh?
That was an excerpt from this book, Proteinaholic: How Our Obsession with Meat is Killing Us and What We Can Do About It, by Dr. Garth Davis. That was my reproduction of how Dr. Davis reports typical patient conversations often go in his bariatric surgery weight loss clinic. Today I'd like to summarize some of the key takeaways that I got from Proteinaholic and give you a flavor for what the book is like so that you can make a decision over whether this book would be right for you. Let's dive in, friend. I'm Dr. Ryan Williams, your host and the founder of Growing Pure, where I help you achieve health and vitality through delicious vegan food. The author is Dr. Garth Davis. Now, he's a leader in the field of bariatric medicine, performing weight loss surgeries regularly as the director of bariatric surgery at the Herman Memorial City Medical Center and the Davis Clinic for Surgical and Medical Weight Management. So some parts of this book are quite autobiographical in nature. Dr. Davis talks about his own experience, like that sort of typical patient conversation that I sort of cheekily reproduced at the beginning there. He talks about his own experience as a bariatric surgeon and someone who his patients look to as a health authority. As you might guess from the title, Dr. Davis was once a strong proponent of the protein gospel. He himself tried to eat as much protein as possible, and he tried to instill that ideology in his patients seeking diet advice. However, his journey towards a better understanding of health totally changed his outlook. He even says directly on page 1 of the book, "Eat more protein may be the worst advice that experts give to the public." He began to feel like a fraud as he saw his own health deteriorating. Despite being on the front lines in the battle against obesity, he himself was becoming overweight. And his blood labs showed that he was well on his way to developing the same diseases that his patients were suffering with. And Dr. Davis recounts in the book how he began to feel that the weight loss surgeries he was performing, whilst they were effective, they weren't really getting to the root of the problem. And there was a particular event that really changed the course of his life. And this auspicious event began in quite an unassuming place, his optometrist's office. And he was hit by news that shook him. His optometrist told him that the very small blood vessels in the back of his eyes were filled with cholesterol. Blood labs confirmed this. It turned out his cholesterol was through the roof, and there was the beginnings of fat growing in his liver. Throwing in high blood pressure and elevated triglycerides, it became clear that he was fairly sick. So his doctor put him on medications for cholesterol and triglycerides, plus a beta blocker for his high blood pressure. So, problem solved, right? Well, not really. His wife was pregnant with their first child at this point, and he was only 36 years old. Now he was on 3 medications, at least, for the rest of his life, with a list of side effects as long as your arm. Something snapped, and he decided he needed to go on a quest and figure this out. He thought he'd been living a healthy lifestyle, so how could he have ended up so sick? He began to question everything he'd been taught in medical school. Could the human body really be so fragile? Were we destined for disease? Was there some knowledge that he hadn't been taught in medical school that could help him both personally and professionally as a physician? This sparked a new passion for him, to find out the truth about disease and healthy diet. He resolved to learn how to get truly healthy. And when he did that, he saw his own health transform. And the end result was this book. So one of the really cool things about this book is the way that Dr. Davis describes the medical view of disease, because he's sort of in the system, so to speak. And his insights on the great strengths of modern medicine, but also its big pitfalls and drawbacks, are highly elucidating. He talks about how there's this underlying assumption that he had throughout his medical career that disease just happens, that it's not a logical conclusion to, for instance, excess fat and chronic inflammation, or a diet that consistently raises your blood sugars, causing diabetes. It just seemed to be genetic bad luck. All he focused on was disease happens, and let's figure out how to treat it. So there is a view of seeing each disease as a lone villain, and this is reflected by different specialists tackling each separate disease, rather than viewing the body as a whole system that's interconnected, and each outward symptom, each outward disease being some kind of manifestation of a systemic disequilibrium that may be present in that system of the human body. He also talks about how patients are trained to demand quick fixes that they recognize. Patients want their doctors to take decisive action that feels dramatic and effective, like a surgery or a drug. No one wants to be told that they may have caused their own disease by their diet that they've had over the decades. They'd rather be told, it's genetic bad luck, could have happened to anyone, here's a surgery to fix it. And whilst of course there may be genetic or just random chance factors involved, we know that for many of these chronic illnesses, lifestyle, diet plays a huge role. Dr. Davis describes how the central question of American medicine is, what do I do for this disease? But he writes What got me to jump out of that leaky boat and swim to the shore of nutritional sanity was simply a different question. How can we become healthier? And one of the cool things that I really like about this book is the way Dr. Davis weaves his kind of dry humor throughout it, like with the patient conversation that I kind of reproduced at the beginning. And that makes it really readable and really enjoyable because it's quite funny. So what is sort of the structure of the book? Well, after the kind of autobiographical intro, we get into the history of how we became proteinaholics. This is a really fascinating story of protein, and in particular the kind of myths and the half-truths that got us to where we are today. And I cover a lot of this in greater detail in my video, Stop Obsessing Over Protein, which is based to a large extent on the content of this book. You can watch that up here if you like, or there's a link down in the description below. But in short, we learn that no culture in all of history has truly thrived with respect to long-term health on a high-protein diet. In fact, quite to the contrary, a low-protein diet seems to be a hallmark of healthy peoples and societies. He then really gets into the bulk of the book, which is focusing on the science of animal protein and its link to disease. And Dr. Davis shows through various studies how animal protein is strongly implicated in many of our most insidious chronic diseases: heart disease, cancer, diabetes, hypertension. And one of the things I really like that Dr. Davis does in this book is he clarifies different types of scientific study and the strengths and weaknesses of them, and helps us understand bad science and how that can trick us into believing half-truths or falsehoods. And I think this is one of the biggest strengths of this book. It's a real crash course in separating scientific fact from fiction. And he dives into the various flavors of evidence that we have showing that animal protein causes disease, although not animal protein specifically, but more animal foods, because we don't really just eat protein in isolation, we eat foods that contain protein. We learn about the biochemical, mechanistic data that shows how a disease might plausibly occur. We look at cross-sectional observational studies. We see these massive cohort studies following a population over time. Of course, we see randomized controlled trials, and we see meta-analyses that compile lots of other different studies into one sort of super study, if you like. So I want to explain a little bit more about what I mean here, and I'm going to use the cancer chapter of this book as a case study. So can we connect animal protein and cancer? Well, yes, but it's not as clear-cut as we might ideally like. We need to look at the totality of different forms of evidence and then come to a sensible conclusion based on all the available data in its proper context. In Dr. Davis's own words, he says, "I cannot say that animal protein causes cancer. What I can say is that animal protein causes various reactions in the body that have been shown to be carcinogenic, and animal protein has been strongly correlated with cancer. We'll see epidemiologic evidence linking animal foods to cancer incidence and mortality. We'll also discover randomized controlled trials that prove a strong link between diet and cancer." And so we begin this chapter by looking at probable causes, including heterocyclic amines. So heterocyclic amines are chemicals that are formed when meat is cooked at high temperature. You know those char lines that you see on the burger commercials? That's where heterocyclic amines are formed, in that kind of blackened meat. And these particular chemicals appear to be strongly associated with cancer. And we know from petri dish studies that heterocyclic amines make early stage breast cancer cells become malignant, and they become more invasive and divide at a much faster rate. We also look at heme iron and N-nitroso compounds. So the type of iron found in animal foods, it's called heme iron, which is different to the type of iron generally found in plant foods, which is non-heme iron. And it's often thought that heme iron is nutritionally superior because it's absorbed more easily into our bloodstream. But this may not be the health boon it first appears to be. So it seems that heme iron, possibly through its ability to create N-nitroso compounds, leads to a greater risk for gastrointestinal cancers, in particular colorectal cancer, whereas non-heme iron does not seem to have this carcinogenic effect. And the story of possible mechanisms doesn't stop there. We have other probable causes that could be playing a role with animal protein. So we have the hormone IGF-1. This is a growth factor that seems to promote cancer. We also have the effect of meat reducing protective gut bacteria in our gut microbiome. And additionally, a particular amino acid found far more in animal protein than plant protein called methionine may have a carcinogenic effect in higher quantities. So then moving on from probable causes, Dr. Davis takes us on a trip through large-scale prospective cohort studies where we track tens or sometimes hundreds of thousands of people over time, assess their health and what habits they had throughout their life that may have led to those health outcomes. For instance, we have excellent data from studies, including the EPIC study. This is the European Prospective Investigation into Cancer, which tracked over 500,000 people over 10 different countries. We also have the Adventist health studies that tracked the Seventh-day Adventists living in Loma Linda, California. And then we have the NIH, American Association of Retired People study that tracked close to 200,000 postmenopausal women over a period of 4 years. And additionally, the Health Professionals Follow-up Study and the Nurses Health Study. These are both out of Harvard that tracked tens of thousands of men and women over decades. Now, as you can easily imagine, with studies this large involving so many people, there is some variation between them, but the broad pattern is surprisingly clear. We see a fairly consistent correlation between animal protein, and meat specifically, and cancer. So then we move on to randomized controlled trials. Now, when it comes to diet, these are very, very hard to do because the conditions that we care about, like cancer, generally take decades to develop. And it's not like you can just stick someone in a lab and keep them there for decades and tell them exactly what to eat every day. That's not feasible. But nevertheless, we do actually have some great interventional studies in this area as well. And one really quite incredible study from Dr. Dean Ornish and his collaboration with the Nobel Prize winning scientist Elizabeth Blackburn showed that a vegan diet and lifestyle program over a period of 3 months was able to lengthen our telomeres. Now, telomeres are these sort of lengths of genetic material that cap our chromosomes. They sort of protect our genes from damage. Think of them like the cap at the end of a shoelace, that little plastic bit which stops the shoelace from fraying and unraveling. That's like what our telomeres do in protecting our DNA and our genes. Now, as you can imagine, with shortened telomeres, we tend to see a link between short telomeres and disease, in particular cancer, because our genes become exposed and susceptible to damage. So this is an incredible finding. A healthy vegan diet and lifestyle was able to affect our very chromosomes, our genetic material, in just 3 months. That's astonishing. So as we conclude this chapter, and we look at the totality of evidence presented, we can't have a definitive 100% correct answer to the question, does animal protein cause cancer? However, looking at all of this evidence, it gives us a lot of reasons to think that the answer is probably yes. So towards the end of the book, after we've been through this journey of the scientific literature relating to different diseases, we tackle the ever-present question, so how much protein do you actually need? Now, for the answer to that, you can watch my video all about it. Again, link in the description below, the Stop Obsessing Over Protein, but the clue's kind of in the title. Generally, if we're eating enough calories, you will be getting enough protein if you're eating calories from whole foods. There might be some exceptions for elite athletes or for certain people as they age, but as a general rule, we're getting more protein than we need. And if we focus more on the whole food and the quality of that food and the additional nutrients it's providing, then we're going to be getting all the protein we need to be healthy. And Dr. Davis concludes the book by giving us a roadmap to recover from proteinaholism as he did. He shares how he now helps his patients to adopt a plant-based diet, and he dispels some of the the pervasive myths around a vegan or a plant-based diet, particularly around protein, of course. And he even provides some recipes for us to get started. So to wrap this up, I think Proteinaholic is a really excellent book, particularly if you want to dive into the scientific literature around protein and animal protein especially, and our health in quite an accessible way. I think Dr. Davis really has a lot to teach us, and he makes it enjoyable and funny the way that he writes. So I would highly recommend this book. Now friend, I really appreciate the time you've spent with me today in this video, and I'd like to offer you a gift. I want to give you my guide on the top 5 nutrition mistakes to avoid on a vegan diet. These are some of the common pitfalls that I see people fall into that can perhaps hold you back from achieving that health and vitality. It's really not complicated, but there are a few common pitfalls. So if that sounds helpful to you, you can get that totally for free. Please click on the link in the description below. It is all yours, friend. And if you've enjoyed this review, then I think you'll also get a lot of value from my video where I dive deeper into all this protein stuff. And if you would like to watch that, you can click right here to do that. Friend, I want to thank you so much for being here with me today, and I'll see you in the next video.